us are involved enough in various organizations locally that you know that one of the things that's very satisfying is when collaboration between organizations is possible. And what today is about is such a collaboration between the town of Lovettsville, a Virginia state organization, Civil War Trails, which morphed into a multi-state organization. Now it's every state from South Carolina to Pennsylvania. That's a system of stories of the Civil War. And the question you might want to ask is, why does anyone care enough to research, pay for, dedicate, maintain, and pay an annual several $100 fee to keep up an historical sign? Okay? And it's been now for me since 2003 when I realized, to my absolute joy, that where I was teaching, my classroom sat right on the charge of a Union regiment against retreating Jubal Early's forces after the famous Jubal Early attack on Washington. They'd come right through Loudon Valley High Schools, locked, and federal forces had charged across our tennis court, our ball field, our parking lots, where the band rehearses, and slammed into retreating army there. And when I realized that, and wanted to find a way to let future generations realize that history's not just in a book, it can be right where you live. How do you do that? And it was my wife Tracy, who worked for the Loudon Museum, where they had a sign for the new Virginia Civil War trail system that recommended that I contact them. And so the result was a sign, the only sign like that in the 6 states on a high school ball field. But at any rate, there it was, we dedicated it, and it was very special. But what I realized is, you can do this in any number of ways. But what if you were to do what Westminster, Maryland did? My wife and I went there maybe 15, 16 years ago, just after Christmas, looking for a field trip. And we found that they had some 18 signs. And if you walked through the signs, you got a total introduction to the very historic county seat of Carroll County, Maryland. Because each sign told us something of what had happened on a day on the way to Gettysburg, but they also told us stories of that piece of ground and what was going on in Westminster, Maryland there. That's stuck with me ever since. What an interesting way to get people to care about historic preservation. You not only see what that piece of territory was like 150 or so years ago, but you also saw a story against it. That's sort of clicking in my head. Some of you were around during Loudon's participation in the Civil War sesquicentennial, 2009 until 2016, and you probably went to at least a sign dedication or two. I've been to Civil War Trail sign dedication in a long time. I think the last time I went to one was maybe 2015, 16, right near the end of 150. And it's still there, it's growing. It's now over 1,500 signs, which is pretty exciting when you think about it. And I got a call from Civil War Trails. This is Drew Gruber. Some of you know Drew. Drew is the new, we would say essentially superintendent of Culpeper Battlefields State Park. He's the park manager, is what they call it in the state park system. But up until a few months ago, he was the executive director of Civil War Trails. And he had this idea. He said, Richard, I got a sign I can't use. What do you mean? Well, one site is being run a little differently, and they no longer wish to be a part of Civil War Trails. And it's a fairly new sign. Now, whatever the sign part of it is, what he's holding here, it's the frame that you can see in the background that costs a heck of a lot of money. He's got one, he says, and he'll peddle it to Lovettsville. This is like going to a primitive Baptist church where I say something and then you all sing it back, except it's me doing both parts. Is there a way we could get rid of that?
Is this microphone also on? Can we turn that one off? Is that necessary? Is that causing trouble?
I can turn it down, but it's not.
You have to turn it off?
Turn it down. Well, we'll figure out something. Drew says, I've got a stand, I can peddle it to you for half price. What's half price, you wonder? That's $1,500. That is gonna drive us crazy.
Okay.
Well, some of you really would love to hear me give this lecture twice, so that's fine. It's great. But I thought, wow, that's great. And Drew had more of an idea. He says, oh, wait, there's more. Not only have I got a cheap sign, that's what they look like. Mass manufactured, and they last forever just about. That's what a new one looks like. We had two signs, and perhaps some of you have been to the dedication of those. One over on Lovettsville's infamous Squirrel was done in December of 2009, and another one up in the middle of town along Broadway, where the main intersection of Broadway and Loudon Street is, dedicated in the spring of 2013. Both of those signs, as you would expect, are aging. This is what an aging sign looks like. It gets mold on it, you can't get out, it gets cracked. The sunlight will do it. If you join Civil War Trails as a civic group or as a municipality, you pay a certain amount of money per year. It's $300, I think is what it is, something like that. And for doing that, they not only put you into a system on their website and in a mass distribution of Civil War Trails maps, they also will replace whatever needs to be replaced free of charge. So we could get 3 new $3,000 signs for $1,500. At which point I got excited. And we have now, for the town of Lovettsville, beyond the town council, and planning commission, and town staff, one of the persons we have is a liaison, Sarah Mosley. And Sarah and I got talking, and Sarah and I and Ed Spanish got talking, and the idea was pretty simple, and that is, let's see if we could come up with a way that we could replace the old two and work them into sort of like a story that the three of them all fit. And if you did that, then you could start with a sign that deals with the first part of the Civil War on the Squirtle. You could move to a sign that deals with what it's like to be invaded. And then a third part, what it's like to be occupied. And that actually takes us chronologically from 1861 all the way to 1865. Some of you were here last month, and you heard a famous architectural historian giving a talk on the creation of the National Historic Register District in Lovettsville back in 2012. If we were to set these signs up, we would circumnavigate the historic district. And there's this. We got construction, you see. You know about it. It's probably driving you crazy. More so if you happen to live here. But even so, if you gotta go through, it's kind of nuts. Lots of people, though, are finding that at 10 or 12 miles per hour through Lovettsville, you notice things about that historic landscape. You start to notice that historic district that for the most part is, let's get home. You went home. Whether it's to Virginia or Maryland or West Virginia, now all of a sudden everybody is, if they're in these, and you can see the backyards, see all the outbuildings and the like. And our thought was, in a time in which people are walking more than they ever were, maybe since COVID or something, this would be perfect. We'll have a little walking tour, we'll have brochures, you can go between the signs. The signs will be in place where there is light, so that if you are a post-dinner walk trying to work off your pizza or burger or Mexican food or whatever it is you have, you can still read the sign. That's the great goal. My excitement was that working with the town, they were excited about augmenting public knowledge and support for their historic district. It had been created in 2012. It kind of fell off public consciousness a bit. This would revive that interest and that consciousness. Okay? So that's the basic deal. Sarah and the town manager and Chris Hornbaker, the mayor, and I, and the officers of the Lovettsville Historical Society, working with the team at Civil War Trails. We came up with a campaign of, we'll write some signs and you see what you think. And then we'll go before the town council and see if they would come up with $1,500. And suffice it to say, given what we're up to today, they did. You'll hear a little bit more about that later. So that's what the idea will be. That's going first sort of northwest at the top, as you might expect, to southeast at the bottom, Broadway, former Main Street that is called Broadway now, and Pennsylvania Avenue that parallels that we are going to be going to. And we have 3 signs that circumnavigate that. And plenty of parking, plenty of places to get a cold ice cream, a cold coffee, a cold beer, a cold whatever you need, and in the winter, hot, whatever you need. So it's perfect. So let's talk about each sign individually, and then we'll adjourn to dedicate. Sign 1 is on Squirrel. We've had one there for a while. Personally, eat at restaurants along Squirrel quite a bit, and I always find it a little bit frustrating because what we did when we dedicated that is we put it inadvertently behind a hedge. And as the hedge grew up, you had to climb over the hedge, or you had, that circle's big. You walked around it, you got to go way around to find a place to get into the circle to go read the sign, and then you got to stand in the hedge to read it. So we kind of knew that not only did the sign look kind of rough at this point, but as well, we needed to move it so that it was easily accessible and near the other monumentation that didn't even exist in 2009. So if we could move it a bit, you'd have a better view of Lovettsville, which is what the sign is about. You could easily get to it. You wouldn't have to stand in the hedge, and you'd have a street light so you could read after dinner. So here's the story. 1861, you know that the secession movement is taking place. Virginia was one of the last to vote on this. Fort Sumter had happened in April. We voted on May the 23rd. And when we went to vote, you can see, if you look at our secession vote in Loudon on the left, come down about halfway, and if you're in the back, you may have a little trouble seeing it. But in Lovettsville, the German settlement votes 46 votes for secession and 325 against. Wow, that stands out. As perhaps does the Quaker settlement, Waterford, 31 to 220. But then if you look at some of the other ones, Middleburg, 115 to nothing for secession. Leesburg, 400 to 22 for secession. And Unison, I love that name. You've probably been to Unison. They voted totally against secession. So we've got these several districts that were on the wrong side of things, apparently, if they were all going to be in sync with their neighbors. We were the Unions. How come? Because from day one, we were totally connected by the hip to both Maryland and Pennsylvania. Most of the people who settled here were German, or even Scots-Irish. Most of them had come down from Pennsylvania to Maryland and then over across the river. It's so low now you can easily see why there are fords. It's easy to walk. You can get over here. And by the time of the Civil War, we had a brand new, expensive covered bridge that connected us to Maryland, Berlin. So all of that made it kind of uncomfortable. I will tell you that German farmers were far less likely to use enslaved labor than other farmers were. Bakers were kind of like that too. Did happen here. We were not slave free, but we were much less totally hanging on to that as a lifeline to us. And if you look at the map here, the red part would be the part that votes to join this new Southern Confederacy, and the white part votes the other way. We want to stay with the Union. Suffice it to say, since the vast majority of Londoners want to go along with Virginia, wanted to go, I about a 6-1 vote, wanted to go with the Confederacy. So it went, and that puts us in a bit of a pickle, doesn't it? What do you need to secure when you've suddenly declared independence and therefore you are at war? You're going to secure, mills. You got to be able to read transportation routes, bridges, things like that. And here we are thinking like, oh, we also have to secure men, people to do the draft. We don't want to go fight to South Carolina or Mississippi or Texas. We just have no interest. Could you just leave us alone? We have no schnitzel, my dear, my kids, my cows. I don't need any more than that. Anyway, there's the beautiful bridge up in the upper left. That was the Pointed Rocks Bridge. Just below it, the Harper's Ferry Bridge. And over here, you can see a picture of the bridge that had just been built that went over to Berlin. You can still buy cigarettes and gasoline there at the left. They were not as into cigarettes, they were more into cigars and chewing and stuff like that. And anyway, you see where we are looking over across the river. All of those blown up in mid-June as a defensive measure to keep from Union invasion. And also made it particularly difficult if you lived over here to get over to Dollar General or whatever else you needed to do in Brunswick. So this was an optimism for us, to say the least. I will also say that some people were so annoyed by the pressure being put on them to join Confederate units that had to be raised for the defense of the new Virginia as part of the Confederacy, that some of them will sneak across the river, wade across the river, boat across the river, and join with Major Henry Cole's 1st Potomac Home Brigade, which was cavalry. And most of us were fairly good with horses, and that seemed like a pretty good idea. If you didn't want to do that, you might go over there anyway, just to hide out so you didn't get drafted. Technically, there is no draft until a little bit later, more 1862, the Confederacy problem. Everybody's in the militia. And if you're in the militia, you're gets called out. You might as well, it's like being drafted, you go no. So it's like, this was not a happy thing. The miller at Waterford vacated the premises of the famous Waterford Mill in July of ~61 because he was being hassled because he wouldn't declare his allegiance to the new Confederate States of America. That's the new Confederate Virginia, so he left. They came back some months later in June of 1862 with permission to establish a cavalry unit of Loudoners that would be raised here in Northern Ireland. And so they are going to be recruiting, they recruited Waterford, Taylorstown, Goresville, that's where the Little Rock Motel is, and Miners, there where you buy the pumpkins and stuff, there along Route 15, just south of Lovettsville, and of course Lovettsville. And probably the most came from the Taylorstown, Lovettsville area, and will join this. What it means then, the independent Loudoun Rangers will be in the field doing scouting and cavalry actions, intelligence gathering, policing as needed. And their neighbors. They're Confederates. Remember that kid you hated, you used to sit next to in your science class back in school? He's now Confederate. And you're Unions. And it isn't pleasant. I was overlooking at the little cemetery behind Willows. We were getting pumpkins yesterday. And there was the Snoots family. The Snootses, I think they were Taylor's downest, but the Snootses were a good example. In 1862, when Confederates of the White's Battalion, the 35th Virginia Cavalry, decided to go on a mission to capture some of these pesky Unionists like the Loud Rangers. They attacked where the Unionists were barracked in the Baptist church. Why were they barracked in the Baptist church? Anybody have an idea? Oh, it's not because they were Baptists. It's because the Baptists were Confederates, at least in that congregation. So if we're going to damage someplace, it better be their church and not the people on the street. So yes, there was quite a shootout there, August the 27th, 1862. And one Snoot's brother was on one side, one Snoot's brother was on the other side. And when the Confederates managed to take the church, and the Confederates went in and grabbed their prisoners, the Confederate Snoot's brother pulled his pistol and was about to execute and spot his Unionist brother. It was stopped by friends. But if you think about it, when you see these family stones around, you realize that's what this meant, because we went a long way. In 1864, a bunch of neighbors came over to look for pesky Unionists on Christmas Eve. This was about 6 months before the Civil War ended. And on Christmas Eve, they went to this house on Lovettsville Road, and this was Fleming Lee Anderson. He was a sergeant. He got a bunch of his friends together. They started dancing. He pitched woo to his beloved, asked her to marry him, and the knock came on the door, and in charged pesky Confederates from Mosby's men, the famous 43rd Virginia Gillespie's Rangers. White's men, who's the guy that will start running White's Ferry after the Civil War. And we're going to have a shootout right here in this house along Lovettsville Road. Fleming Lee Anderson will be shot before his mother, who's racing out the back door, when a hook on his belt for his saber, which he had removed. The hook was then caught on a Windsor chair, tried to get chair out the back door. It didn't work. He got shot. Not on Christmas Eve, as was Lovettsville. He was buried the next day in cemetery in Waterford. But that's what this first sign is about. We were Unionists, and in Code 1, it cost something to be a Union man in rebeldom. This is new locations of say under light, a little closer to the other monuments. You don't have to jump over a hedge. They're putting this in our head in a hot state, the hottest month we've seen in a while, back just after the 4th. And that's Chris Brown on the right, and that's him on the left too. He is the new executive director of Civil Trust. He's right from their organization. The new sign, you'll get to see it when you go over that. It's in your program. I realize it's not fully legible, but that's there. So let me stop one. Stop 2, in the middle of town, where there was a sign, and it too was looking like it's been up for a decade. It's time for replacement. We decided that one thing that would be good was that that sign was where it was put at the time perfect. Then a bunch of other signs and obstructions got in the way. And by this time, if you tried to move the sign, you had to fight your way to do it. And so we figured, let's put it more or less in the same location, move it a bit, and change the angle of view, as you will see if you look. I'll show you a photo of it in a minute. This was about the idea that a town could become a highway to the armies. I think if there was anything we know for Frederick County, for Loudoun County, this was a huge avenue for armies moving back and forth, east and west. Lovettsville got to enjoy all of that. The Great Battle of Antietam that I just had a slide up there, over in Sharpsburg, Maryland, September 17th, 1862. After that was done, it was a huge catching of breath of the armies of both sides. The Union Army seemed to want to catch its breath a little too long to keep President Lincoln happy. He really put some pressure on General McClellan to get a move on. So when McClellan did move on, they came this way. This is the bridge that they built. Now, that's the old bridge on the right. Covered bridge is burned away. Just the piling is there. And on the left, that is a pontoon bridge, boats with a ramp over it. To give you a sense of it, when you marched over a pontoon bridge, they told you, we are not going to be marching in time. Because if everybody goes left and everybody goes right, you get the idea. But that's a good photograph that was taken. That's October 1862. You're looking at Brunswick, Berlin, and we are standing at about where the little gas station is just before you cross the river today. And here's another picture. That's a close-up of what that bridge looks like. You can see the boats there right now. They're pretty big, good-sized boats. And they will make a fairly stable bridge. It's not a result of right. But I really kind of like that. You can see Brunswick strong. And for those who really need to know, just beyond the tree, a little bit to the left is where the Dollar General is. Great landmark. If you don't know me, you probably don't know why that's important. But when I shop, we go to all the fine stores. And we buy stuff in the yeah. And then they march into Lovettsville. To be honest with you, these were not the first guys in. The first guys that came in large numbers were cavalry. The head of McClellan's Army of the Potomac, the cavalry portion is headed by General Pleasonton. Pleasonton will lead them, they'll come marching right in. Where do they march? Past the 7-Eleven, and kind of the road at that point kind of arcs this way, right past where this church will be built in 1901. Go up a few blocks to Loudon Street, turn right there by rodeos. Okay, let's take another picture, becomes a little clearer. This is a picture looking towards us. We down the street somewhere here on the left. We haven't been built yet. This is late 19th century. But the intersection that today has a Catoctin Baptist Church, I think, is in the old McLean's grocery store. At the back of it is Rodeo's Mexican. Okay, that's this building. Let's see, I've got to go up right here. Okay, that is Loudon Street. This is where the new sign is. So it's where the old sign was too. Okay, that is Reamer's Hotel, where you drink, where you stay overnight, where you dine, only the best. Turkey pie, you name it. Good German food. And when the infantry starts marching in after the cavalry, there is Ambrose P. Burnside, future commander of the Army of the Potomac. He's got to change his job in about 10 days. He will come and he will make Reamer's, no longer with us, but you notice there's a little tiny shop beside Reamer's. It's still there. I'll show you another picture. This is gone, so they can run the sign. We tore it down, the sign. It's been gone for there's Reamer's from a different view, sort of on the other side of the road, looking across. There's General Burnside's Oldsmobile pickup truck, horses. But this is early 50s, something it is, maybe late 40s. But anyway, you see that same intersection. That major intersection, though, when you think about it, here we are, it's a little old Virginia town. Think of the tens of thousands of marching troops that made that turn there. Cool. So that's where, back in 2015, Lovettsville Historical Society worked under the leadership of the Hispanics to get a sign up there. And this now is a slightly updated sign to merge a little better with the other two. And what we talked about is several parts. One, all those troops marching in. B, having a general right here in our little old hotel. And C, if you're on an October night, it's raining, you're gonna be cold, which means you gotta have a campfire. which means we gotta go for some wood. What's the most convenient wood around? Oh, those don't. The officers were good about it, one of the two damage. They said, only take the top wood. 10 minutes later, after you've taken the top rail, another group of guys comes over and say, all right, we'll just take the top rail. By the time we're done, we're at the bottom rail. And that's pretty much, you killed the fences on the farm of Riddlemoser's farm, and pretty much, it's a lot of damage. Oh, and there's animals. Yes, we give you some sort of credit for the cow or the goat or the whatever we took for food. But guys are hungry, they gotta eat. And it can cause a lot of damage. On they marched, campfires no, and headed on to the next major town in the south, Percival. And there 31,000 men spent Halloween. Good Lord, can you imagine 31,000 men showing up to trunk or treat at the local schools or banging doorbells? I mean, these were Union boys. When they got here, we all cheered, you know, flags were streaming, and it was very exciting, and we're kind of annoyed all the damage they did, but they were our boys, not Percival. Percival was overwhelming. In fact, good heavens. So, a little bit different once we got a little bit further south. We saw this whole thing in a rinse repeat kind of deal after the Great Battle of Gettysburg. And when it came south through, again, the Army of the Potomac, this time under its new Commander General George Gordon Meade, I'm going to set up another bridge. Notice it built two of them this time. Same kind of pontoon bridge. You see a wagon train working its way down to those two bridges that will then go 2 miles once we get across the river into Lovettsville. And we'll see the same old deal. All those fences that got repaired, and at least it wasn't as cold, they probably didn't have as much wood. So here is the intersection. We're moving the sign. Here I am taking a picture of the old sign back in March. I'm going to move it a few feet around so you can look right at the intersection. Turn slightly, you can look at the Berlin Pike, which is now Loudon Street. Berlin Pike, the turnpike from the early 1850s that went down to Percival. Or you can look left and watch where the soldiers were coming from Berlin on that pontoon bridge. And there is Scott, head of Civil War Trails, putting in the new sign at the angle. Shiny new, similar story, similar graphics, but a slightly different story. So we're more emphasizing damage. One thing that Civil War Trails has changed a bit is realizing that it might be good to write the sign for families as well as for Civil War buffs. And the original audience for Civil War Trails was overwhelmingly Civil War buffs who were very much into technical aspects. If you've ever been to a Civil War roundtable, you know that sometimes you go, and as a friend of me said, they're not really speak, they're listening. And I realized that by the time I hit 60 and I was sitting, that some of them were into such intense detail, I really wasn't. We have tried to make the signs a little bit more to a wider audience, so that if you're Civil War buff, you'll still be pleased. You have a viewscape of what we're talking about. And that it will also blend in with the other trail sign part of it. So let's do the final sign when we're going to go over to today, over on Pennsylvania Avenue. First thing you have to know is the Civil War moved on until 1864-65. Ranger, or shall we say, guerrilla warfare, or partisan warfare, had gotten to be nasty here. We were very famous for that. And whether we're talking Union boys and the independent Loudon Rangers, or we're talking Confederate boys and the 43rd Virginia Cavalry, most of these Rangers, they're getting pretty nasty. And I can tell you that federal forces were amazed by the kinds of feat that the 800 or so men that Mosby had in the field could pull off. By the late fall of 1864, they decided that the best way to get rid of Mosby was to start Mosby and his men probably find food somehow, but when they had at least 1,600 horses, each ranger had to have multiple horses because it could go on multiple physically exhausting for the animal raid that week. So with all of those, one thing that those policemen did constantly was go on what they call corn raids. And the idea of a corn raid is simply a bunch of riding trains go out, we'll give you Confederate scrip or an IOU, and we're going to take the corn to feed the animals, forage for the animals. And so what they decided to do, Federals at the top, General Grant gave the green light to General Sheridan, heading the Army of Shenandoah. That was sort of a line that connected from Harper's Ferry all the way over to Manchester before the south. He gave the green light to send a huge number of cavalry over Snickers Gap, or Route 7 crosses, and they arrived on the Monday after Thanksgiving in the fog. You know what that day is like when you go back to work the Monday after Thanksgiving. Well, if you happen to be going over there, you've got traffic jams bad now, so the traffic coming from Winchester. Imagine 5,000 Union cavalrymen with torches in your way. Well, that's what happened. They spread out south of Bluemont, heading down towards Upperville. They spread out north. And we found it interesting to look that they burned hundreds and hundreds of barns, chicken coops, stables, anything that was useful for animals. Rounded up all the animals that they could round up. Anybody that they thought was a Confederate, if they were male of a certain age, they rounded them up as well. And a number of houses accidentally, quote unquote, caught fire. How come they didn't come up here? Well, if you're good suspicious security, we're lucky you come up and say, they got something else. Otherwise, why didn't they just come all the way up to the river and burn the heck out of us too? Well, what something else was a month later, 2,500 soldiers arrived to occupy Lovettsville and in a series of camps in a big semicircle around Lovettsville that ran from a mile or so north of town on Berlin Pike, all the way around to the northwest. And then, if you know where the cemetery is behind Lovettsville Community Center, sort of over there, it was sort of that much of a semicircle. They put their general, General Thomas Devon, in the home that today, there's our buddy Sheridan. They put him in one of the nice homes, which is still there. It's got a bed and breakfast off on the Hudson and that's what that's going to look like. Way up to the north is where Linden Hall is. That's it. And that will be General Devon's headquarters. He will be visited at least once by General Sheridan, who will stay in another well-known house out on Wyler Road. If you've ever seen Woodbine, beautiful Victorian, brick Victorian Woodbine coming up off of the Berlin Turnpike, it's on the left, maybe half a mile down the road. But if you want to go to see that during our annual program of tours that we do in May, we often get a chance to visit Woodbine, neat house, and see what General Sheridan is. But the story that really takes us is, what was it like to be in Lovettsville? It was like this. You could not get into town without a pass, which meant, let's go backwards here, you had to get a pass from General Devon. And if you didn't have a pass, you didn't get into Lovettsville. Okay? And that could be very hard to get that pass, particularly if you were not quite clearly Unionist. If you were Confederate, you'd probably be arrested. We noticed also that they put this telegraph wire across the river. Right? So constant communication. What's the goal of these people? Keep Mosby contained. We don't want Mosby being able to go through northern Loudon, or even over there between the hills on the other side of Short Hill to attack Harper's Ferry and all the operations, because that's the main base of the Army of Shenandoah, trying to knock the Shenandoah Valley out of the war. Okay, so this is a protective measure. the people here, we had all these soldiers using up animals, using up wood, etc. But the story we remember, probably the most, happened near George's Mill. Most of you go to George's Mill probably to buy Sam Poison's cheese, goat's cheese or something like that. But it's a B&B, or it has been. I will tell you that just beyond George's Mill, a couple of miles west of town, was the Riddlemoser Farm. And the Riddlemoser Farm was, I'll get to that in a minute, but the Riddlemoser Farm is where they erected large numbers of tents and then large numbers of winter huts, log huts. Okay. Another thing we understand, though, is not everybody here is not quite as clear in sympathy as it might be. That's Lum Winter. Very popular name. Notice on the short sign outside we have one of our early preachers. Winter's a common name on the road. There's a common name. That's Lum, Christopher Columbus Winter. He is a member of White's Cavalry. He also sometimes runs with a very famous bandito, guerrilla leader John Marley. And they both run sometimes with Mosby's men. In that winter of January 1865, Mosby had been shot in December when he was recovering. And so people are sort of catching their breath then. These two guys on the right have a personal interest. It seems like back over here on the left, we have some civilians who like dating them Yankees. And there was one Yankee that particularly was very handsome and supposed to have an excellent prospects. His father was a congressman from New York. He was Lieutenant Peter Haskin. And our George sister on the right, Lucy, was dating Peter Haskin and Lum Winter. And Lum Winter started to get Mosby's men with some of Marley's men, with some of White's men, to begin a regular program of attacks on all of those cavalry camps around Lovettsville. The worst attack came on a brutal night, a couple of days after Sheridan had visited, gone home. They hit the Riddlemoser Farm. That's the Riddlemoser Farm, as it might look at night. This is actually December, not January, with the snow around. But this is just beyond George's Mill. And those Confederate boys were going to get back at Peter Haskin for dating Lum Winter's girl. And boy, they slammed into those tents. And, excuse me, actually they slammed into the house. What they didn't realize is that a bunch of additional men had just arrived, and those were the guys in the tents. What a shootout out of what is today George's Mill, Stevens Road area. The casualties were heavy, more heavy on the Union side, but most of these men ran with their tails between the legs in the end when they realized they were outnumbered by about 10 to 1. The Union casualties were treated at a hospital here in Lovettsville, which, if you think about where our town office is, you may have gone out back to explore, or might have explored if you've gone to Willow's gift shop and gone out back to get a wagon or something to, for pumpkins. There's a little cemetery back there. This is the church that was there. It's the Presbyterian church, burned in a fire in the late 30s, early 40s, and a newer church was built, and that newer church is now Willow's gift shop. But at any rate, we wanted to have a sign that commemorated this occupation, this fighting that went on, with a place that you could actually walk out to. And so that's why we're putting a sign at the town office so that you walk right around behind the town office and into this cemetery where the Presbyterian church, where the wounded from that fight were brought. This is us putting the sign in. You can see the church where you are now in the background. This is a topic, major camps about Lovettsville. You get to read this in person because we're going to walk over now, so I won't dawdle on this slide. But we do hope, from the perspective of both the town and the Lovettsville Historical Society, that you will pick up one of our new brochures. The brochure looks like, there's a bunch of them on the table back there. So, you know, get one or bring one to a friend. It's a simple walking tour with an explanation of the town, a little bit of its history, of the system of signs that we have. And you can get more at the town office, you can get them at the Lovettsville Museum. I'm also gonna put them, along the wall with coupons, you know, the runs with paper and such as that. You'll be able to get them. And also at the Lovettsville Library. So, we hope you'll remember this little bit of history through signage that sort of doesn't tell the whole story, but maybe gets your curiosity going. And so at this point, we're going to adjourn. If you need to use the restroom or get water, out that door into the next door community hall, you'll see the restroom sort of back. We're going to be walking around the corner, and you'll see the town office back there. We're going to be doing the program on the porch, and then we will walk over to the new sign, and it will dedicate. Of course, it's covered up. So we already read it anyway, but you know, the formal things like this are covered out by cover again. Thank you very much. Did you ever wonder how heavy these are? They are.
Richard, we could care less.
That was practice.
Who's supposed to sharpen them?
I wonder how sharp they are.
Maybe the mayor should do it.
Maybe you should do.
Anybody got a machete?
This is not as sharp as your average Civil War
Got a
sailor. How's
buck
that?
knife.
Not as sharp as your average.
There you go.
Yay!
Cut through the red tape.
I'm like masticating.
Can we get a picture of you? Just thank you.
This is when the typo actually appears. Here, here.
We brought two pairs of scissors. It's not going to be sharp enough.